A U.S. carrier strike group loaded with dozens of fighter jets and Tomahawk cruise missiles is racing toward the Persian Gulf right now, a 5 to 7 day journey from the South China Sea to a potential new front line. In Tehran, residents are emerging from a brutal crackdown, braced for what might come next. And in Washington, the White House insists that no options are off the table. This is not a rerun of 2019 or 2003. This is something new, a high-stakes strategy unfolding in real time that could rewire the Middle East and send shockwaves through your wallet. What Washington doesn't want you to see is that the bombs, the sanctions, and the protests are all connected pieces of a single, unfinished conflict, a war that began not in 2025, but in 1953. This is the story of America's longest-running shadow war entering its most volatile phase. And here's the surprising truth. The outcome won't just be decided in the skies over Isfahan, but in the exhausted streets of Iranian cities, in the back-channel meetings of Arab capitals, and in the fragile circuitry of the global economy. To understand the explosive present, you must first step into the past. The year is 1953. The United States and the United Kingdom engineer a coup to overthrow Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh after he nationalizes the country's oil. We reinstall the Shah, an autocrat who rules with an iron fist, and our full backing for the next 26 years. This is the original sin. For millions of Iranians, it branded America not as a beacon of democracy, but as a colonial power that subverted their sovereignty for oil. Fast forward to 1979. That simmering resentment boils over in a popular revolution. The Shah is toppled, the Islamic Republic is born, and Iranian students seize the U.S. embassy, taking 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. Diplomatic ties are severed. They have never been restored. From that point, the animosity becomes structural, a frozen conflict. The U.S. backs Saddam Hussein's Iraq in a bloody war against Iran in the 1980s. It designates Iran a state sponsor of terror. It imposes layers of sanctions that slowly strangle the Iranian economy. Then, a brief thaw. In 2015, the Obama administration and world powers strike the nuclear deal, the JCPOA. Iran agrees to limit its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. But in 2018, President Trump makes a fateful decision. He unilaterally withdraws from the deal and launches a maximum pressure campaign of unprecedented sanctions. Iran responds by ramping up its nuclear program beyond the old limits. The stage is set. The two countries are on a collision course with no diplomatic off-ramp. The question is no longer if they will clash, but how and when. Let's break down the current crisis. It has two simultaneous, interlocking fronts: a military nuclear confrontation and a domestic battle for Iran's soul. First, the overt war. In June 2025, following Israeli strikes, President Trump ordered a massive direct attack on Iran. More than 125 U.S. aircraft and 75 precision bombs devastated key nuclear facilities across the country. This wasn't a covert operation or a proxy skirmish. It was a direct, calculated blow meant to cripple Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran retaliated by striking a U.S. base in Qatar, but the message was sent. The U.S. was willing to cross a line previous administrations had treated as a red line. Now, in January 2026, the U.S. is moving that carrier strike group, the USS Abraham Lincoln and its escort of destroyers armed with hundreds of missiles, back toward the Gulf. Why? Because the second front, inside Iran, has exploded. For weeks, Iran has been rocked by the most extensive protests since 2022, sparked by a catastrophic economy. The Iranian rial has halved in value. Annual inflation is above 30%, with food prices soaring over 70%. This isn't just political dissent, it's a fight for survival. And the regime's response has been predictably brutal. A nationwide internet blackout, over 2,400 protesters reported killed, and thousands arrested. Security forces have fired live ammunition into crowds and even assaulted hospitals. Here's where the strategy gets layered. The Trump administration isn't just watching, it's actively pouring fuel on the regime's internal crisis while keeping military pressure high. Just days ago, the U.S. Treasury sanctioned senior Iranian security officials like Ali Larijani, Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, for their direct roles in the crackdown. But more strategically, it's targeting the regime's financial lifeline, its shadow banking networks. These are intricate webs of front companies from the UAE to Singapore, used to launder billions from Iranian oil and petrochemical sales. The U.S. is systematically dismantling them, sanctioning the individuals and companies that move the money, ensuring the revenue from Iran's desperate oil sales funds repression, not the people. It's a financial siege designed to compound the economic misery fueling the protests. And there's a wild card: foreign fighters. Intelligence reports indicate nearly 5,000 fighters from Iran-backed Iraqi militias have crossed the border to help suppress the protests. Think about that. The regime is so distrustful of its own population and security forces that it's importing its proxy armies to crush its citizens. This is a stunning admission of fragility. So, what's the U.S. goal? It appears to be a pincer movement. Maximum external pressure through military deterrence and financial strangulation, combined with maximum internal pressure by empowering, rhetorically and through sanctions, a revolutionary populace. The aim is not necessarily regime change, but to force the regime into a choice. collapse under the weight of its failures, or capitulate to American demands on its nuclear program, regional behavior, and domestic conduct. It is a gamble of historic proportions. Let's be clear about the human cost. This is not abstract geopolitics. In Shiraz, hospitals are so inundated with gunshot wounds that they can't admit patients with any other illness. Families of the killed are coerced into giving false testimony on state television to get their loved ones' bodies back. A communications blackout, now over a week old, has severed Iran from the world, creating an information vacuum filled with AI-generated fake videos and terror. One Tehran resident told CNN that on the rare occasion an international call connects, no one dares speak freely, just regular pleasantries, knowing the secret police are listening. The regional consequences are just as real. 4 Arab states, Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, have urgently intervened in the past 72 hours, begging the U.S. not to strike and warning Iran not to retaliate against American assets. They're terrified. They see the tinderbox. A major U.S.-Iran war would not stay contained. It would draw in Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthis in Yemen, potentially igniting the entire region, disrupting the world's most critical oil choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, and sending global energy prices into the stratosphere. Think this doesn't affect you? Imagine the price at the pump if 20% of the world's oil supply is threatened. Imagine the deployment of hundreds of thousands of American troops if a full-scale war erupts. This is the stakes escalation that happens not in months, but in days. The unintended consequence of maximum pressure might not be a compliant Iran, but a fragmented, desperate state lashing out, or a full-blown regional conflagration that no carrier group can contain. To grasp the long-term implications, you need to see the Iran play not as an isolated crisis, but as a critical move in a much larger grand strategy. A former senior State Department official writing in Foreign Policy argues the Trump doctrine is one of consolidation. Faced with the overwhelming challenge of China and a stretched military, the U.S. is seeking to secure its home base, the Western Hemisphere, delegate burdens to allies in Europe, and achieve a stable balance in the Middle East so it can focus its ultimate power on Asia. Iran is the final piece of that Middle East puzzle. The thinking goes, by decisively degrading Iran's nuclear program and using internal unrest to weaken the regime, the U.S. can create a more favorable regional balance. This allows Arab states, now more worried about Israeli actions than Iran in some cases, to manage regional security with less direct U.S. troop presence. It's a high-risk bid for a managed, stable Middle East that no longer demands constant American babysitting. But there are 3 monumental what-ifs. First, what if Iran doesn't break? The regime has survived pressure for decades. It is now rapidly reconstructing its damaged nuclear sites and vowing to defend itself. It is turning ever more decisively to Russia and China, though they offer little real security support. We may be creating a more aggressive, nuclear-capable Iran permanently aligned with our top adversaries. Second, what if the strategy works too well? If the regime collapses, what comes next? As a UK parliamentary briefing notes, the opposition is fragmented. The void could be filled by a military dictatorship, a different faction of hardliners, or a failed state. A Libya on a much larger, more strategic scale. Is America prepared for that outcome? Third, what happens to American credibility? This strategy is a stark departure from the multilateral diplomacy of the JCPOA. It is unilateral, militaristic, and openly seeks to foment unrest. It tells every nation, if you cross us, we will not just sanction your government, we will attempt to bankrupt it and empower your people to overthrow you. This is a powerful deterrent to some. To others, it is a blueprint for why they must obtain a nuclear deterrent at all costs. The lesson for North Korea, for instance, is crystal clear. Never give up your nukes. So where does this leave us? We are at an inflection point unseen since 1979. The United States and Iran are engaged in a total confrontation, military, economic, and ideological. The old policy of containment is gone, replaced by a ruthless strategy of coercion. The key insight is this. The greatest threat to the Iranian regime may not be American stealth bombers, but its own collapsing economy and a generation that has lost all fear. And the greatest risk to America may not be an Iranian nuclear weapon, but being dragged into another endless Middle Eastern conflict just as it tries to pivot to the defining challenge of the 21st century in Asia. The coming weeks will be decisive. Will diplomacy, urged by the UN and regional powers, find a last-minute off-ramp? Or will an incident, a misinterpreted move, a proxy attack, trigger the spiral nobody can control? The unfinished war that began with a coup over oil in 1953 is reaching its climax. The outcome will shape the Middle East for a generation and test the limits of American power. The world is watching, and the clock is ticking.